Shalom, welcome to the Temple Institute's Holy Temple Visitor Center here in Jerusalem. We're in the Old City, the Jewish Quarter, and the Temple Institute is devoted toward the realization of the rebuilding of the Holy Temple here in Jerusalem on Mount Moriah. The goal of the Temple Institute is to educate the world, to educate the Jewish population, to educate the non-Jewish population into the importance for the entire world of the Holy Temple. We have to remember that the Holy Temple was intended always for tefillah, for prayer, for worship for the entire world. When Shlomo Melech, when King Solomon built the Holy Temple and inaugurated it, his prayer that you can read in the Book of Kings is that the entire world should come and partake in the prayer, and that God should answer the prayers of all peoples who come up to Jerusalem, to the Holy Temple. And of course, the prophecy, the words of Isaiah, that my house should be a house of prayer for all nations, is ultimately the goal of the Jewish people and the goal of the Temple Institute. We have behind me here a model of the Holy Temple during the time of Herod. And there are really three major sections that you can see. This first courtyard, each with a square in the corner, is Ezrat Nashim. That's the women's courtyard. And that was the outer courtyard of the Holy Temple itself. The Holy Temple sat on Mount Moriah, which is today commonly referred to as the Temple Mount. It sat in a place where today the Dome of the Rock sits. The Holy of Holies, which is the westernmost part of the Holy Temple, inside the sanctuary itself, is precisely where the Dome of the Rock sits today. So the temple faced eastward, toward the Mount of Olives. So the Ezrat Nashim, the women's court, was the most eastward of the courtyards. And then entering into those two bronze gates, those are called the Nicanor gates, we enter into the inner courtyard where the Mizbeach, where the altar, the great stone altar is, where the offerings were made on a daily basis, and of course extra offerings were made also on the festivals, on the pilgrimage festivals, on Passover, on Sukkot, on Shavuot, and of course on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. If we continue further into the temple itself, into the sanctuary, known in Hebrew also as the Heichal, with a massive doorway, then we get into the sanctuary where only the Kohanim could go, and in there is where the golden menorah stood, and the golden table of the showbread stood, and the golden altar of the incense. Beyond that, as I mentioned before, to the westernmost part of the Mikdash, of the temple, was the Holy of Holies, the Kodesh HaKodeshim, where the Aron HaBrit, where the Ark of the Covenant rested. Only one day during the year would the Kohen Gadol, the high priest, enter there, and that was on Yom Kippur. He would place burning incense before the Ark of the Covenant to atone for the people of Israel on Yom Kippur. Other than that, no one entered on any day of the year. To my left are the musical instruments that were played in the Holy Temple. They were played by the Levites, the Levitical orchestra. That was one of their jobs in the Holy Temple. The music accompanied all of the offerings, the daily offering, of course, on all the holidays. Involved trumpets, silver trumpets. Silver trumpets specifically are made from a single piece of silver that is molded and stretched and bent to the right shape. These harps and lyres are all constructed according to ancient coins and other representations of the actual instruments that were played in the Holy Temple. The harp has 22 strings, which is a significant number, 22 letters in the Hebrew alphabet. And the lyre has 10 strings, and again, it's referred to in certain places in Psalms as the 10-stringed lyre. Music was a big part of the service. The Holy Temple wasn't a cathedral. It wasn't a place where you had to be quiet and stand still. It was a place of action. Everything in Judaism actually is very action-oriented, and the Kohanim, the temple priests, had tremendous responsibilities that they had to perform in the Holy Temple They had to bring the offers, they had to slaughter the animals, they had to do a lot of heavy-duty work. And so I would imagine that it was a very lively place. Lots of noise, lots of sound, lots of music. There was the incense. The incense gave the entire city of Jerusalem a tremendous fragrance. It was so powerful. And, of course, the fire itself, the altar fire. So the music was part of a very, very active happening, I would say, each day. And so again, the idea of the Holy Temple is that the people of Israel and people of the world come to be in the presence of God. And it's supposed to be a very joyful experience, a very happy experience. So if there's a lot going on, a lot of action, a lot of activity concerning the service, that just adds to the excitement and the pleasure and enjoyment from all the participants. And again, from God, who gets great pleasure from seeing his children, his creation, relate to him in all the temple. Here we have the Kohanim, the temple priests. To our left is what's called in Hebrew Kohen Hediot, the regular priest. Not sure there's another translation for it into English. And on the right, of course, is the Kohen Gadol, the high priest, who had his own special garments. There are 4 garments of the regular Kohen, his tunic, his belt, which is actually 16 meter long. I believe it's very, very long, and had to be wrapped around, and it would take he had to have an assistant Kohen wrap it around him each morning. And then there's, of course, his hat. Those are the 4, and pants underneath the tunic. Those are the 4 different garments of the regular Kohen. The high priest, Kohen Gadol, had those 4 garments plus an extra 4. As you can see, he had his Ne'il Techelet, his blue tunic, which is made completely of dyed wool, dyed with the Techelet snail. In ancient times and today, a very, very precious dye. In many cultures, it symbolized royalty. In Judaism, it symbolizes holiness. And on top of his tunic is his ephod, his vest, which is made with wool dyed with the techelet, with the blue, with argaman, the purple, and with tolat sheni, which is the red, and thin bands of pure gold. Again, all very precious dyes. We've actually been able to study, research, and recreate those dyes from the original sources, which the techelet is from a sea snail. The tolat sheni is from a tiny insect that appears on trees. And the argaman, the purple, is actually also from the techelet snail, a slightly different process of arriving at that color. On his choshen is his breastplate, which has the 12 stones, each representing, in fact, each one has the name of one of the 12 tribes inscribed in it. Again, all these details and of all the vessels and garments, everything you see here in the Temple Institute is made according to the description in the Torah, according to the materials that are prescribed by Torah, according to the specific dimensions. It's required a tremendous amount of research in certain cases, especially here. The stones are each given a specific name in the Torah itself, but throughout the millennia, those same names have been used to represent different stones. So in order to arrive at the original intention of Torah, we had to do a tremendous amount of research, which took place over a few years until we were able to really pinpoint what we believe to be the 12 precise stones that are intended. The Kohen Gadol also has a stone on each of his shoulders. Again, it has the names of the tribes also inscribed on those. And you can see his crown, called the tzitz in Hebrew, which has engraved on it Kodesh LaHashem, holy to Hashem, holy to the Lord. And that was a very significant part of his clothing. All of his clothes are intended to represent a corresponding part of the human being, of the human body, of the human emotion, of the human impulse. And each garment could help to atone for or to fix, to rectify a sin. If there's a sin of the heart, the breastplate could atone for it. If it's a sin of thought, then the tzitz, etc., etc. Again, the garments themselves alone don't atone or affect any change in human, but the Kohen Gadol was chosen of the most righteous, the most holy, the most modest, the most pure of all the Kohanim. He would serve as Kohen Gadol for his entire life. He wore these garments. All the Kohanim had to wear the garments all the time that they were in the temple doing their job. The regular Kohanim would have what we call today an Israeli army, miluim, reserve duty. And they would spend a few weeks each year in the Holy Temple. The Kohen Gadol was full-time. He had the job of representing the entire nation of Israel. So he had to be open to absorb everybody, from the best to the lowest. He had to represent everyone. That was his job. He wasn't better than anyone. He was the brother of everyone, just like he was the brother of Aaron, the first Kohen, was the brother of Moshe. The Kohen Gadol, his job was to be our brother and to represent all his brethren before God in the Holy Temple.
As you can see, this is the Holy Altar, or the Mizbeach as it was called in the temple. Over here, offerings were brought up every single day, and it was the seat of all the activities in the temple. We can see a ramp which led up to the main part of the altar. Every day, the priest would go up this ramp to bring up the offerings. On the top of the altar were 3 fires. One fire was constantly burning, as there was a commandment to have a fire burning constantly. Another fire, the coals were used for the incense altar, which we will discuss at a later point. And the 3rd fire was used for the offerings. This was the seat where the offerings were brought. Let's talk about the structure. This is a hollow structure and is in fact filled with stone. But there's something unique about this stone. The Temple Institute has collected stone from the Dead Sea that were never cut with an iron tool. This, of course, connects to what we already discussed about why Solomon built the temple and not David. Because, as we know, David was told that his hands were filled with too much blood. And the same thing goes for these stones. The message is very clear. These stones could not have been cut with an iron tool because iron tools are weapons of war. And the temple is a place of peace. And even though it is important, God's message was that here at the altar, which brings people together to each other and to God, it needs to be a place of peace. And therefore these stones have never been touched by an iron tool. It's covered with clay and is one of the smallest halakhically acceptable sizes. If we compare to this picture over here, we can see that the original altar in the Second Temple was considerably larger. However, this one is still halakhically acceptable. I'd like to draw your attention to these silver jugs and vessels on top of the altar. We have many people who donate to the Temple Institute, and they all have different stories and wonderful reasons for doing so. But I'd like to share one of them with you because it's something that I have always found very powerful, and it really symbolizes what the Temple Institute means to so many people. There was a couple that for many years could not have children. And one day they discovered that she was pregnant. But then the doctor told them that the twins, because she was pregnant with twins, were not achieving their required waking that they had to survive. And if they wouldn't reach it by a certain point of time, they were going to die. So the father said, God, if you let my twins achieve their required mass, for every gram that they gain, I will donate that in silver to your temple service. The twins were born healthy, and this is where we got our vessel from. And this is something so powerful to me because it shows how many people all around the world are connected with wanting to rebuild the temple and do something active to contribute to it.
This painting shows us the Holy Temple in all its glory. We're standing, as it were, on the northern side of the Holy Temple, and of course the temple, remember, faces east. We can see here, this is the Eichal, the actual sanctuary. This massive front of the sanctuary is called the Ulam, and you can see how large the opening to the sanctuary is. We see the Kohanim standing below on the steps to the sanctuary, how tiny they are compared to the full height of the opening. And there was, of course, a fantastic red curtain that hung on either side of the opening. This flashing light here is actually the sunrise coming from the east, reflecting off the Nivreshet, a golden chandelier that was donated by Helena Malka, Queen Helena, who was a convert to Judaism. She was a queen, and she moved to Jerusalem. She became famous for charity work, helping the poor, and she donated this beautiful Nivreshet, which reflected the sunlight as the sun was rising in the east, which meant to the people in the Holy Temple that it was time to say the morning Shema, the first prayers of the morning, because the sun was up. We see in this courtyard, this is the inner courtyard of the Holy Temple, we see everybody who is wearing white and who seems to have a belt of either blue or red is a Kohen. We see further toward the center of the picture, we see the altar, the great stone altar, and we see a Kohen standing in the corner, and of course the smoke is rising from the morning offerings. The people in the foreground, if you can catch in the very left bottom foreground, you see people who are in their civilian clothes. Those are Israelite notables that were invited up each day from different towns across Israel, so that everybody could be represented in the morning service. And again, to the far, far left, standing with their backs toward the Nicanor gate, which was the gate which led from the inner courtyard, which we're looking at, to the outer courtyard, the Ezrat Nashim, the courtyard of the women. We see the Levites, the Levitical orchestra, playing music. Again, every offering was always accompanied with music and song. This picture that you see was a daily event. It happened every morning in the Holy Temple.
What we can see over here is the incense altar, on which was brought incense twice a day, every day. This was made out of acacia wood and covered in gold. And every day, a priest was selected to bring the incense. And this was a huge honor because a priest could only do it once in his entire lifetime. So because of this, every priest wanted to do it. They would have a lottery system every single day where the priest in charge would choose, based on the system of counting fingers, the one who would be lucky enough to bring up the incense. So how would this work? The priest who was selected would take a fire pan, as we can see over here. He would collect coals from the altar outside, one of the three fires. He would bring it into the sanctuary, and he would prepare a mixture of spices. In this container, he would prepare a mixture of 11 different spices. Now these spices, in the time of the Second Temple, were specially formulated by a family called Family of Tinas. They had a very unique recipe and preparation technique for making this incense. And the Talmud discusses how the sages begged and pleaded with them to reveal the recipe, but Family of Tinas refused. They did not want their technique to fall into the wrong hands. However, when the Second Temple was destroyed, they did reveal their recipe because they wanted it to be recorded. So now we know the components of the incense. However, we are forbidden to make the full mixture without the temple standing, but we know what each one was made of. So the priest would take the mixture of spices and he would pour it onto the coals, and the beautiful fragrance would fill the air. We can see over here a wonderful representation of the high priest bringing up the incense. He was allowed to anytime he wanted. It overruled the priest. We can see him cupping it in his hands, and the fragrance and beautiful aroma rising up all over Israel. The Talmud describes how brides never used to wear perfume on their wedding day because the smell was so beautifully strong that they would already be smelling fragrant. They could smell it all the way in Jericho, which is on the other side of Israel. I want to discuss the spices for one moment, because this, I think, is a wonderful lesson, which is very relevant to everyone. As mentioned, there are 11 spices that make up this mixture. 10 of them are unique and fragrant, but one of them, galbanum, has a very pungent smell and doesn't smell particularly good. One would think that it's a disgrace to bring it into the temple, let alone use it in this mixture. But on the contrary, we are actually forbidden under pain of death to leave out even one of the spices. So what does this mean? The lesson we learn from this represents humanity, which is why it is so beautiful. Because the world is made up of so many different people, so many different types of Jews, so many people with strengths and weaknesses. And it is very easy to think that if someone would be unlearned or doesn't do good deeds, they shouldn't be part of the congregation. But the message behind the incense was that God was saying, I want everyone here. It doesn't matter where they are, and it doesn't matter what they're doing, but everyone needs to make this mixture. This is the golden table of the showbread. We see this is made out of acacia wood and covered in gold, and there are 12 shelves to symbolize each of the 12 tribes. On these shelves stood the showbread, a very unique bread that was made every single week and stood on these shelves all week long in display. At the end of the week, on Friday, new loaves were baked, and on the Sabbath, the next day, the loaves would be switched, with the new loaves replacing the old loaves, and the old loaves would be distributed to all of the priests, who would then eat some. A miracle would occur that all the priests, and there were many, would receive not only enough, but they would feel satiated, despite there being 12 loaves and so many priests. In addition, unlike regular bread, which if even left out for a few days becomes stale, the bread on these shelves remained fresh and fragrant all week long, despite being on display. Moving aside from the thought of there being enough bread, I want to look at the structure of the bread itself. We can see that this bread has a very unique shape, specially made to fit these shelves. Each loaf of bread has a very unique structure because it seems that every loaf is supporting the loaf on top. And this, again, ties into the message of the bread. Historically, bread has always been the ultimate symbol of sustenance, which is prosperity. So why was this in the temple, which was such a spiritual center? Why would we need to focus on our physical needs? Because again, this ties into our relationship with God and each other. Bread is the symbol of prosperity and God's goodness to us. We know this because the priests had enough to eat, because God ensured that it would be so. But each loaf of bread supported the one on top. Because the message is that God has given us so much, and this would be the ultimate symbol to realize this. He has given us wealth, He has given us health, He has given us money. But His stipulation was that we share it with other people. And that is why the blessing is twofold. Number one, that there is enough for every single person, but that each loaf supports the one on top. Because His message was that He wants to give us, but He wants us to share it with other people.
Behind me is a model of the golden menorah which stood in the temple sanctuary. It's a model because the real menorah, which the Temple Institute has created, stands in the plaza of the Jewish quarter here in the Old City. We'll look at that a little bit later. This is just a model. This is actually the wax model that was the original prototype of the menorah that we're going to see in a few minutes. The menorah, as you can see, has 7 branches. It stood on the southern side of the temple sanctuary, as opposed to the table of the showbread, which stood on the northern side. And while the table of the showbread was symbolic of our physical bounty and blessing from God, the menorah with its 7 candles, its 7 lights, was symbolic of the spiritual blessing which we would receive from God. It was kindled every morning by a priest. A special method of kindling it, 1 wick would light the next candle. So similar to what we learned about the table of the showbread, it's another example of shared responsibility, of one helping the other, of togetherness, of unity. We can see these 2 implements, this implement I should say, which was for cleaning the wicks and the holders of the olive oil, the pure olive oil, which was the fuel for the 7 candles. And so every day, a Kohen would first clean out and then replenish the oil and then light the candles. These 3 vessels here, these clay vessels, actually contain in them pure olive oil, pure temple pure. That is, it was produced by the Temple Institute in purity, from the harvesting of the olives through the production of the olives, as well as the clay vessel, which was made for the Temple Institute in a process that preserved its purity. So the oil contained in these 3 vessels can actually be used one day to light the menorah, God willing, when we rebuild the Holy Temple. This painting depicts the Kohen, the priest, lighting the 7 candles, the 7 wicks. Behind him on his stand is the pitcher that contains the oil. And here again is the vessel we saw a moment ago that for cleaning the wicks and the holders of the oil. And he would stand on a 3-stepped ladder, as it were, in order to reach, because the height of the menorah is slightly higher than that of an average human being. We're looking at a model of the Ark of the Covenant, the holiest of all the holy vessels in the Holy Temple. I'll explain in a moment why it's a model and not a recreation like all the other vessels here in the Temple Institute. The Ark of the Covenant, of course, was the first vessel commanded by God at Mount Sinai to Moshe to build. And in it was later placed the 2 broken stones of Torah and the 2 complete stones of the 10 Commandments that Moshe received, and also a Sefer Torah, a Torah scroll that was written by Moshe. Those were placed in the original Ark of the Covenant. The Ark of the Covenant always rested in the Holy of Holies, which was, as you saw when we opened up the curtain here represents the Parochit, which was a massive, massive curtain that separated the Holy of Holies from the Holy. That is, the Holy of Holies from the sanctuary where the table of the showbread was, where the menorah was, and where the golden incense altar was. To the west of that, the most extreme western part of the Holy Temple was the Holy of Holies. And in it was the Ark of the Covenant, which rested on the foundation stone. Foundation stone is considered to be the stone from which the world was created. That is, it is the source. It is the most central element of creation in creation. And that's why the Ark of the Covenant rests upon it. We know that when Moshe would receive word from God, he would stand before the Ark, and God would speak to him from the Ark. We know that the high priest, as we said before, once a year would enter into the Holy of Holies on Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, and place before the Ark the incense as a symbol of atonement for all of Israel. We see a picture here. showing this is the high priest, but on Yom Kippur he would wear only white. And one of the most dramatic ceremonies, aspects of the Yom Kippur ceremony was when he would enter into the Holy of Holies, and this was the real test whether Israel was going to receive its atonement or not. He would place the incense, you see it's on a special shovel, which he would carry in and place before the Ark of the Covenant in order to atone for Israel. When he came back out, it was a moment of tremendous joy and relief for the entire nation, because it means that God accepted his gesture of atonement. More about the Ark of the Covenant and why this is not the original Ark, and why it's not even a proper reproduction of the Ark, although its dimensions are a proper reproduction. The Ark, which was placed into the first Holy Temple, was hidden away by King Josiah when the armies of the Babylonians were approaching, and he realized that the temple was in danger. So according to Jewish tradition, he hid this Ark of the Covenant in a chamber beneath the Temple Mount itself, where it is to this day. Nobody has discovered it yet. Because of the sensitivity of the Temple Mount, nobody's allowed to do any type of digs underneath or to search for it. But our tradition for many, many, many millennia has been that it is here, although there are many other traditions in the world that claim it's in all different places. And they're all very interesting, and it's a subject of tremendous interest to everybody, but we're quite confident that it is still resting actually below where the temple stood itself, and that one day we'll be able to recover it and put it back in the Holy of Holies. It is the greatest symbol of the Holy Temple itself, of our connection to Hashem, of the fact that God wants to be so close to his people, so close to humanity, that our world is of the utmost importance to Hashem, and that really is the lesson and the meaning of the Holy Temple itself. The prophet Haggai says, in this place, referring to the place of the Holy Temple, in this place I will establish peace. So it's extremely important to always recall that the Holy Temple is first and foremost a place of peace, a place of unity for Israel, for all the nations, and of course with Hashem. Before us here is the Temple Menorah. It is the real deal. It is made according to the details described in Torah, with the materials described in Torah, and abiding by the special process that's described by Torah, which says it needs to be a miksha echat. It needs to be one piece of gold. So how did we do this? Gold, we know, is a very heavy metal, but it's very soft. It can't possibly support itself. So how do you make a structure with 7 branches that can stand on its own out of one piece of gold? How they did it in the desert there are many different theories. How we did it, we created a substructure, an armature of steel, and then put that structure into a bath where we did a gold plating process. To put a very thick layer of gold on it, and that was how we were able to achieve makshe echat, this single piece of gold, because it all formed itself as one piece on the armature. It has a tremendous amount of gold in it. I can't think off the top of my head how much. Very, very heavy. And again, it's the precise size and detail described in Torah, including the kaftarim and the prachim, all the special decorations that you see toward the top of each of the branch, and in the central branch. The minute that we rebuild the Holy Temple someday, God willing, we'll be able to bring this into the temple and light the candles. We saw earlier that we have the oil for it. We're all ready. We're just waiting for that moment.